Hi, everybody. Back again. Today we're doing multiplying and dividing rational numbers, which might include mixed numbers, decimals, anything that has a ratio involved. Let's get started. We're going to multiply and divide. And this first one is a fraction division. And remember, we don't really divide fractions. We change it to multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm going to leave my 1/8 alone. And I'm going to change my division to multiplication. My 1/6 is really 6/1. And there's two ways of dealing with this. You can multiply straight across, which is what you're supposed to do. 1 times 6 is 6, and 8 times 1 is 8, and we can reduce that to 3/4. You could have done this. What I did when I reduce is I divide by 2 and divide by 2 in the numerator and denominator, and I get my 3/4. But I could have done that earlier, and a lot of times it's easier to divide before you multiply. So I could have divided the 6 by 2, divide by 2 and you get 3, divide the 8 by 2 and you get 4, and then just multiply through. In a lot of ways, that's easier. So you want to use the easiest method whenever possible. We've got 3/4. And let's see what's next. 1/4 divided by 1/2 is the same as 1/4 times 2/1, which of course is 1/2, 2/4, or 1/2. Now we've got some negatives. Again, the negatives, I like that they write them in the numerator. A lot of times textbooks put them in the middle, which they really don't belong there. I prefer to use a dot for my multiplication instead of an X. And again, we're going to multiply straight across. We could have simplified this, but the problem with simplifying when you have negatives is that a lot of times students forget and they lose their negative. For example, they'll divide this by 2 and get 2, and divide this by 2 and get 1, and it's really -1, and they lose it. So in some ways, it might be safer to just multiply those. 2 times 1 is 2, 5 times 4 is 20, and reducing is pretty easy. It's 1/10. 1/8 times 4/1. I'm multiplying by the reciprocal is 4/8 or 1/2. I think you have to reduce these, but I'm not absolutely certain. Oh, here we go. A mixed number. Now, a lot of people wonder what I'm doing when I multiply 2 times the denominator. What I'm really doing is I'm taking 2 and 4/5, and I'm going to give you a picture real quick and show you exactly what this means. This is 2 wholes, and then I've got a 4/5. Oh, too many, sorry. There, it's a little off, but anyway, there's 2 and 4/5. As you can see, there are some extra fifths here. There's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and one more. There we go. And the reason that I multiply 2 times 5 is to get this 10/5, and then 4 more. So 2 times 5 is 10, plus 4/5, which is, 14/5. All I'm doing is multiplying the 2 times the denominator to tell me how many parts I have, and then adding it to the 4 parts that I started with. So I've got 14/5. 1 times 2 plus 1 is 3/2. And I could simplify. Again, in this particular case, 3 times 14 is going to give people some trouble. I realize it's 42 and it's pretty easy, but a lot of people would find it a lot easier to divide the 2 first and then multiply 21 over 5. And you have a couple of choices here. You could leave it as 21 over 5, 4 and 1/5. It's your choice. I like the 21 over 5 just fine. Now we're doing decimal division, and there's a couple of things you could do here. And I want to show you just 2 methods for this. The one that you're probably most familiar with is changing this division. Now be careful. 1.5 is the divisor, and it goes on the outside. So 1.5 into 4.2. And some of you are aware that when you have a divisor with a decimal, you do need to move your decimal over. And the decimal goes straight up. And 15 goes into 42 twice. 3 times would be 45, which is too much. And we subtract, and you have a 12 remaining. And you have to bring down the 0. You don't put the 1, 2 right there. And 15 goes into 120, 6 times. Yeah, 6. No, that's going to be 8 times, sorry. 8. And 8 times 15 is 120. And we subtract. Now, that would be okay to do, and it's perfectly acceptable. But I think you're going to like this method much better. I'm going to write this as a fraction, 4.2 over 1.5. Now, some of us are aware that simplifying fractions works like this. Let's say I have a fraction, say 4 over 10. And we look for a common divisor, and we divide by 2 in the numerator and divide by 2, and we get 2/5. But a lot of people look at this and they say, well, how do you simplify this? Well, watch this. I'm just going to multiply by 10. And what I get is 42 over 15. And 3 goes evenly into 42 14 times. And 3 goes evenly into 15 3 times. And either method is okay. Oops, sorry, 5 times. Jeez. 14 over 5. 14 over 5 or 2.8, or if you like 2 and 4/5. Any one of those is fine. I'm going to go with the 2.8 since it's in decimal form. One-fourth times 5. 5 is really a fraction. It is a rational number, and we can prove it's a rational number by writing it as a fraction. 5 over 1, and that is 5 over 4. 5 quarters is $1.25, and you can write it either way. Now we've got some negatives here. Again, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Negative 7 over 2 is the same as negative 3.5. And I'm multiplying that by negative 1/4. And we get 7 over 8. And if you like decimals, you can change it to a decimal, or you can just leave it as 7 over 8. One half times 1/2 is 1/4. 1 over 4. Too easy to write down again. 3/4 divided by 3. Now this time, I'm going to put my over 1 right there, and I'm going to change it to 3/4 times the reciprocal, which is 1/3. Dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. And I'm going to simplify now. Divide by 3, divide by 3. Some people call it canceling. What you're really doing is dividing the numerator and denominator by the same number. That is 1 over 4, 1/4. Okay, I'm not going to do a decimal division this time. I'm going to show you something. First of all, we know a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And if I'd like, I can multiply the top by 10 and the bottom by 10. Multiplying by 10, actually by negative 10 if you like. Take a look what I get. I get 26 over 5, which is 5 1/5. 5.2 if you like. Wasn't that nice? Two and 3/4. 2 times 4 is 8 plus 3. That's 11 over 4. Times 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7 over 2. That is 77 over 8. Perfectly acceptable. No reducing to do. You're all done. Three over 1 times 3 times 6 is 18 plus 1 is 19 over 6. And this is where that simplifying comes in handy. I could multiply the 3 times 19 and get 57 over 6, but it's really hard to do dividing by 3 at that point. But it's really easy to divide by 3 into 6 and get 2, and 3 into 3 and get 1, and I get 19 over 2, which is a really nice, easy answer. If you like 9.5, 9.5, or just simply 19 over 2. .5 times 2.5. If you like, you can change it to fractions. We could do the multiplication on the side. There's a nice little trick for multiplying by things that end in 5. Lots of possibilities here. A lot of people are just going to automatically take the 2.5 times the 2.5 on the side and do their multiplication. That's fine. 5 times 5 is 25, carry the 2, that's 12 and 0, and 25 gives you 50, and that's 625, and we have 2 decimal places, 6.25. I want to mention that a lot of times fractions are actually easier than decimals. Take a look. Negative 2.5 is negative 5 over 2 times 5 over 2, which is 25 over 4. Sorry, negative 25 over 4. And look what I did over here. I forgot my negative. I like the negative 25 over 4, or negative 6 1/4, or negative 6.25. All of those are perfectly acceptable. 4/5 times 18 plus 1 is 19 over 2. And again, I don't want to multiply the 4 times 19. 76 isn't that bad, and 76 over 10 is 7.6. In some ways, that's kind of easy. If you wanted a decimal for this, that would be the way to go. But to divide by 2 gives you 1, and divide by 2 gives you 2, and 2 times 19 is 38 over 5, which is fine as well. Either way you like to go, 38 over 5. We've got some negatives here. Now we've got a mix. We have a division with a fraction. We can multiply by the reciprocal. And I think you're going to find that that's going to be the easiest for a lot of people. So I could write this as negative 1.75 and multiply by the reciprocal. And I'm multiplying by negative 5 over 1, which is just negative 1.75 times 5. And you could do the 1.75 times 5. Sorry, that's a time simple error. And multiply that out. And a negative times a negative gives you a positive. But I want to mention something. I like that this happens to be 7/4. So I'm going to take negative 7/4 and multiply it by 5 over 1. That's a negative 5 over 1, sorry, which is 35 over 4. This is fine. 4 goes into 35 8 times and 3/4, or 8.75. Or I can multiply it over here and get the 5 and the 2 and the 37 and the 3 and the 8 and move the decimal 2 places. Any one of those is fine. Notice that we have a negative times a negative. and whichever one you prefer. Since we've got a mix, I'm going to go with, I like the 35 over 4. Notice my fractions were almost the easiest of all. I've got negative 7 over 4 divided by 2 over 1 is the same as multiplied by a half, which is negative 7 over 8. Oh, here we go. This is 7 over 2. 7 halves is 3.5 times 5 over 2, which is 35 over 4. That looks familiar. They sure like that answer, don't they? Hmm. 3/4. And this is negative 2 over 1, so I'm going to multiply by negative 1 over 2. Notice that I always put my negative in my numerator. I like leaving it where it belongs. That is negative 3 over 8. Fine answer like that. Don't even need to reduce it. Finally. It's taken me a long time. Sorry it's taken so long. All right, we've got a negative 3 over 2. And 4 times 4 is 16, plus 3 more is 19 over 4. And unfortunately, I can't reduce this, but 3 times 19 isn't that bad. It's 27 and 30, which 57. Let me show you what I'm doing in a second here. Over 8, and I'm done. Let me show you what I did here. I want to multiply 19 times 3, but I'd like to do it in my head. So what I do is I think of 19 as being 10 plus 9, and I'm multiplying that by 3. And I'm using the distribution to make it easier. So I multiply the 3 times the 10 to give me my 30, and the 3 times the 9 to give me my 27, which is 57. And I'm able to do it in my head that way. And of course, you can always write it out, but I think it's easier in this way. So I've got 57 over 8. Negative 1 over 1, of course, and we're multiplying by 13 over 2. Nothing else to do, just multiply by the reciprocal, negative 13 over 2. Oh, decimal division. Let me read this for you. This says negative 1/2 divided by 8/100ths. That's that thing right there is red, 8/100ths, which is divided by 8/100ths, which happens to be negative 1/2 times 100 over 8. And I can simplify this, which is negative 50 over 8. And that's a perfectly acceptable answer right there. Now, some people are going to want to do the decimal division, and this is kind of ugly looking. Let me show you what it looks like. It's negative 0.5 divided by 0.08, and this is the divisor, so we're putting 0.08 into the negative 0.5, and we have to move the decimal 2 places. We have to add the 0 in, we have to put the point at the top, and we're talking about 8 into 50, which is really what this says. Don't forget the negative when you're doing this. 8 goes into 50 6 times. No, sorry. Yeah, 6 times 8 is 48. And we have a 2 remaining. And that's 2/8 or 1/4. But what I kind of prefer is to go ahead and divide this, negative 25, divide by 2 and divide by 2 for 4, which is also negative 6 and 1/4. It's really easy to forget your negatives by the time you finally get done with the decimal division over here. I'm going to leave it like this, negative 25 over 4. Nice easy one. It's negative 2 over 1. We've got negative 1/5 times negative 2 over 1. There we go. 2 over 5. And we've got a mixed up one here. I'm going to use fractions. This is going to be negative 12 over 5. All I did is multiply the 2 times 5 is 10 plus 2 more. And it's being divided by negative 1/2. I'm going to do this in 2 steps. I probably could have gotten away with 1, but I'm going to go ahead and do it in 2. That's negative 12 over 5. And I'm multiplying by the reciprocal, which is negative 2 over 1. And that is 24 over 5. I like that answer perfectly well. That is 24 over 5. I could go with negative 2.5 multiplied by negative 1.75. I would not want to do this multiplication. A lot of people are going to grab their calculator, but I want you to see that fractions have a use. 2.5 is negative 5 over 2. And negative 1.75, all I do is I think of the biggest money that I can use to make $1.75. The biggest coin I can use is quarters. So I have 7 quarters there. And that is 35 over 8. Back to 35 over 8 again. A negative times a negative is a positive. And we're almost done. That is, how about we write this as a fraction? How about we write negative 14 over 10 times 7 over 2. One little simplifying I can do. 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into negative 14, negative 7 times. That's negative 49 over 10. Now, a lot of people look at this and go, oh, that's an ugly fraction. But look, it's the same as negative 4.9. Either one of these is fine. I kind of like the negative 4.9 in this case. And one more. That is negative 4/5 divided by negative 1/4. I'm going to go ahead and do this in one step. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is negative 4 over 1. If you like, this is being divided by negative 1/4. And I just multiplied by the reciprocal. And that's 16 over 5. And we've got 6.5, which is 13 over 2. And it's multiplied by 13 over 10. And this one is 169 over 20, and we're done. 13 times 13 is 169, and 2 times 10 is 20. Can't reduce it. What? What did I do wrong? It didn't like... what didn't it like there? Oh, I forgot the negative. Oops. Helps to remember your negative. Sorry about that. Negative 97 over 10 times negative 1 over 2. It does help to keep your signs. 97 over 20. Couldn't figure out what I did. There we go. It's nice to get them wrong on occasion, I guess. Okay, so negative 18 over 10. Now I could have reduced that to negative 9 over 5, either one. And I'm multiplying by 11 over 2. And in this particular case, it's probably easier to simplify. 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes in here negative 9 times. That's negative 99 over 10. This time I'm going to remember my negatives. Or negative 9.9. Negative 3/4 divided by 0.2, that's 2 over 10 or 1/5. I'm going to put divided by 1/5. That's 0.2. That's negative 3 over 4 times 5 over 1, which is negative 15 over 4. 1.75 is 7/4 times 8 9/2. And no reducing, that's negative 63 over 8. And all done. Sorry it took so long, folks. A couple of extra minutes there because I forgot my negative. Hopefully you'll remember and do even better than I did. Have a good day. Good luck with your homework. See you later.